Okay, hi everybody, we're back. We're reading The Story of Redemption by Ellen White, okay? And we're on page 18, all right? We're talking about God who just made the decision to let Satan know and his angels it's time for them to go, to leave heaven, okay? And I want to read the sentence that we read before we came to this section, part 6 here of our study. Their high and happy state had been held upon condition of obedience to the law which God had given to govern the high order of intelligences. Now, a couple of things I want to talk about real quick are, number one, we read in Genesis about the story of Adam and Eve, okay, and everybody might know that story. If you don't, go back to Genesis and read it, okay, it's very important. Adam and Eve were happy, they were perfect, okay, excuse me, and they were the high order of intelligences on this earth, the highest, okay, human beings, okay, made in God's image, perfect human beings, okay, and Mrs. White tells us in it's in Patriarchs and Prophets. She tells us, and you can get that book online. She tells us that, excuse me, Adam and Eve were told that they would stay in the Garden of Eden and be happy and perfect as long as they obeyed. Okay, as long as they obeyed God. And so the test of their loyalty was the tree of life. Okay, and I think it was the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Okay, sorry. There were two trees there, okay, and one was the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And they were not to partake of that tree. They were not to eat of it. They were not to touch it. Okay, just go about their business like regular. Okay, taking care of God's garden at that time. That was their job. And He showed them how to do that, but they were not to touch that tree. All right. So in our lives too, He has set up, okay, certain lines that we are not to go across. We are not to pass as His people. Okay. The world lives a certain way, His people live another way, okay, and we have to be taught. So Adam and Eve had to be taught. They were told which way to go and which way not to go, okay. So they chose to go the wrong way. Thus, they disobeyed God. They chose Lucifer over God, and they were kicked out of the Garden of Eden, okay. Then they were subject to seasons, okay. And the weather in the garden was perfect, and they didn't have to wear any clothes. There was no shame attached because their covering was the Lord's righteousness, okay? His perfection was covering them as long as they were obedient. They chose not to obey, then they had to leave the Garden of Eden, okay? Satan and his angels chose not to obey, and we just read where God has decided that it's time for them to go, okay? Now, I want to take us to our time in Revelation, okay? Our Savior, who is the Son of God, okay? He's going to return. We each will have to give account of ourselves, okay, before His bar of judgment, okay, which is just, okay? He will make the decision for or against, okay, who is going to spend eternity with Him in heaven, all right? So, we have 3 examples so far, okay? Ours is going to be the final example, okay? Set aside until the time that He comes, until He returns to this earth. Who we're going to follow, we have to make that decision each and every day. But we don't have to make it alone. He is there with us to help us, okay? To help us not listen to Satan, okay? Help us to make the right choice even after Satan has set us up. We can go to God and we can ask Him to help us and help us to change and help us to make the right choices, okay? So it's very important that for us, okay, to live in heaven, which is the next step for God's people, we have got to make the choice right now, okay, to follow Him or not to follow Him. And He has offered us His help by already proving to us that He cares for us, okay? Lovingly, He died on that cross, okay? There's nobody I know that would die for me at all, okay? And even if somebody would die for me, they can't save me, okay? And Jesus is the one who came down here, who created me, I believe, created everyone, and he died for me. Okay? And he's God. So even though he says his law can't be changed, if he gives me his righteousness and I accept his death on the cross, then, okay, then he makes me who he wants me to be and makes it possible for me to be fit for heaven. And that word fit for heaven is something that Mrs. White uses throughout her writings. We have to be fit for heaven. Just because I want to go to heaven doesn't mean it's okay. Okay, doesn't mean I can. Okay, I've got to be fit. All right, going back to that law again. That law doesn't change. Okay, doesn't want me to kill. Doesn't want me to commit adultery. If it's okay for me to have another woman's husband, then there wouldn't be the law of adultery. Okay, I could just walk into any woman's any family that I think I should be with that woman's husband. I can just walk in there and take him out and just say, hey, he's mine, I want him. Okay, we don't even have to be married. I can just go in there and take him and say I'm married, and we can do whatever we want to do. Okay, God says there's a law against that, and he mentions that law first in the Old Testament. Okay, in Leviticus he talks about his laws then that govern human beings. Okay, his law does not change. Okay, but it is possible for us to obey his laws, and he is the one that makes that possible, because he is the only one who has ever lived on this earth who kept God's law. He was God, he is God, and he kept his law down here as a human being, so that we would not have to die that eternal death or damnation that the law requires if you don't obey. Okay, so let's continue reading, and just don't forget these thoughts that we have right now and that we're sharing. Okay, so that we can be like him and be fit for his to live with him in heaven. Okay, all right, let's go on. But no provision had been made to save those who should venture to transgress his law. Satan grew bold in his rebellion and expressed his contempt of the Creator's law. This Satan could not bear. He claimed that angels needed no law, but should be left free to follow their own will, which would ever guide them right. That law was a restriction of their liberty, and that to abolish law was one great object of his standing as he did. The condition of the angels, he thought, needed let me read this again. The condition of the angels, he thought, needed improvement. Not so the mind of God, who had made laws and exalted them equal to himself. The happiness of the angelic host consisted in their perfect obedience to law. Each had his special work assigned him, and until Satan rebelled, there had been perfect order and harmonious action in heaven. Then there was war in heaven. The Son of God, the Prince of Heaven, and his loyal angels engaged in conflict with the arch rebel and those who united with him. And I'm adding, who do you think won? The Son of God and true loyal angels prevailed, and Satan and his sympathizers were expelled from heaven. All the heavenly host acknowledged and adored the God of justice. Not a taint of rebellion was left in heaven. All was again peaceful and harmonious as before. Angels in heaven mourned the fate of those who had been their companions in happiness and bliss. Their loss was felt in heaven. So, we're reading and we understand, okay? They cared for each other. They loved each other. But they had to pay the consequences for their choices. And we'll be right back.